Hello guys, welcome back to another video. I've been getting a lot of questions about the new support changes to the items like Doran Shield and the GP10 items, and also Ruby Crystal. So I figured I would just make a video about it because I've answered it a lot on my Tumblr especially. So I figured, yeah, it would be easier to just make a video and talk about what I think about the changes and what starting items I think are best currently after the patch. So I have this just little Notepad document that I made just for my own personal reference when the patch came out, so I could see the stats for myself. And yeah, I'll just keep this up on the screen because it makes it a little bit easier to explain. And these stats right here are just how much each stat is worth based on their base items. So for example, 180 is worth 36 gold, 1 AP is worth 21.7.5 gold, etc. And obviously not all of these stats are equal in their actual usefulness. Like health is by far the most useful stat. So an equal amount of gold of health is worth more than an equal amount of AD, to put it like that, which we'll get to later on in the video when we talk about Ruby Crystal. But first up, let's just talk about what item I think is the best, and that's Doran Shield. Maybe I'll put this all this stuff in the description so you guys can just look at it if you want to see the stats. It's not really that long, and yeah, I'll just put it in the description because it's kind of hard to show all this at once. But I still think Doran Shield is the best, especially for melee supports, and especially if you're playing against long range AD carries like Caitlyn or ranged supports, which people have been playing more like Zyra and Nami lately, it seems. At least more than they did before. So just because of that, I think Doran Shield is automatically better just because of the block passive on it. And some of these stats are a little bit weird, right? Because you can't put an exact gold value to how much the block is worth. But what I've done here is just, for example, in lane, if you take an average of 1 auto attack every 5 seconds, then the block passive is worth 288 gold, because you are essentially regenerating 8 health every 5 seconds. And 8 health regen is worth 288 gold. Obviously, the more auto attacks that you take, the more that the Doran Shield is worth. So I think that 1 auto attack per 5 seconds is a pretty reasonable amount. I would argue that it's even more than that, especially in trades. When you're in trades in bot lane, especially level 1, level 2, when you're trying to get dominance over the lane, you're going to be taking a lot of auto attacks, and yeah, you're probably going to be taking more than 1 auto attack per 5 seconds. It's probably going to be more like 1 auto attack per second, which at that point it's worth an absurd amount of gold, 40 health regen per 5, which is ridiculous. So the Doran Shield is just really good, and even if you're only taking 1 auto attack per 10 seconds, it's still worth 574 gold. So while it doesn't build into anything, it's still a ridiculously cost-efficient item, and in my opinion, it's still the best start overall. Not to say that it's always the best start, but I would say about 80% of the time, maybe. I don't know. Somewhere around there, though. It's definitely the best general item, I would say, for starting. Moving on in no particular order here, I guess. Doran's Ring is worth 666 gold, just off its stats alone. But as we talked about before, some stats just aren't really worth as much, and AP doesn't really do that much for supports, and that's half of what the item is worth. So on a mid lane, for example, Doran's Ring is super efficient because they can use all of these stats, and they also take advantage of the passive on it, which supports can't do because they don't last hit. But on a support, like, what is 15 AP gonna do on Nami, or what other supports? I guess Zyra it would be pretty good on, but even still, it's not as useful as something like health or taking less damage, because that's really the most important part about bot lane. Annie, it's okay on, but even still on Annie, like, most of your damage is coming from long range auto attacks, and also the return damage on your shield. So, I mean, it's still a good start on Annie, Zyra. I would say those are like the two that would work on, and also obviously like some unconventional supports, unconventional AP casters that you may play in support role. I don't know, just naming them off the top of my head, maybe like Lysandra, LeBlanc, stuff like this. But one of the most crucial things that it's lacking is health regen, and also has a pretty low amount of health. It is only 20 less than Doran Shield now, I believe. Yeah, 20 less than Doran Shield and Doran's Blade, but it's still, that 50 gold is worth a lot in terms of health. And also the lack of health regen kind of sucks, but it does allow you to pick up one more health potion than Doran's Shield or Doran's Blade would. So it can be a good start on things like Annie, especially if you're in a winning matchup like against Thresh, or you can also run it against Leona, because if you're able to like poke her out of lane in the level 1, it gives you that little bit of extra damage and more mana regen to be able to spam your Q on her. So in those matchups it's pretty good. But yeah, I don't know. I think whatever. That's about enough about Doran's Ring. Doran's Ring is also just a good item to pick up like on those supports, even if you don't start with it, just because of how efficient it is. But the new Spellthief is also really good, but we'll get into that later. Doran's Blade is I don't know. I don't think it's viable. It could be. This is kind of the same thing with Doran's Shield, where you get health regen based on how many auto attacks, but it's the reverse of it's counted on your auto attacks, not how many times you get auto attacked. So supports like Annie or Zyra, who have long attack ranges, could be useful, but meh, I don't think so. It's really cost efficient, obviously, but it's not the stats that you necessarily want. I have tried running it on Thresh before, and I didn't really see that much of a difference, to be honest, in like my damage. I was running with just like a full 1580 page with Doran's Blade and maxing Flay, or putting 3 ranks into it early, just to see like how much damage it would give me in lane, but it really wasn't worth it in my opinion. So yeah, not the best Doran's Blade. Moving on to Ancient Coin. Ancient Coin is pretty much the same as it was before. It's actually a tiny bit better if you stay in lane. It used to have 5 health regen on it per 5, and now it has an average of 5.28, because I forget the exact health that you get. I think it's like 5 per minion that dies, something like that. Yeah, I think it's 5 per minion. Don't quote me on that number, but something like that. And now that it's not just a 5 flat, you have to count in the extra cannon minion that is in there every 3 waves. So that's where the extra 0.28 comes from. So assuming you're staying in lane, it's actually a little bit better than it was before. But obviously once you get out of lane, it's not as useful. But you shouldn't really have Ancient Coin when you're out of the laning phase. It doesn't really make too much sense. You should be more advanced than that by that point. But Ancient Coin is still a matter of just not having like super useful combat stats. It has the 2 regeneration stats, so not really a starting item I would suggest, because it doesn't really give you any pressure in lane. It kind of just helps you survive. You can run it in some matchups like Thresh versus Leona, because Thresh beats Leona really hard, so you don't actually need the extra stats, like combat stats. Same with Alistar versus Leona. Alistar beats Leona really hard, and it can just survive easily, so you might as well just pick up the ancient coin, build a little bit extra gold, and have more mana regen to spam your heals, and health regen to survive the poke. But outside of that, I definitely wouldn't run it in matchups that are like even or not in your favor. You should only run it in matchups that are in your favor to make it kind of like an even matchup, where you end up building more gold, which puts you a little bit ahead. But other than that, I don't think it's a very good start. Spellthief's Edge is a very good start in my opinion. It's the calculation on the gold that it's worth is a little bit strange because there's not really a better way to calculate it. Basically what I did was make it an average AD. So for example, it gives you 10 extra damage every I think it's 10 extra damage, or is it 10 or is it 8? I forget what the hell it is. I think it's 10 extra damage. Maybe my calculations on this are wrong, because I think AD is worth I don't know. Well, either way, if it gives you 10 extra damage, it is basically, if you auto attack once every 10 seconds, then that is an average of 10 extra AD every 10 seconds, because you auto attacked once. If you auto attack more than that, then the gold value gets a little bit less because your auto attacks won't be amplified as much. So it's a little strange calculation. But again, these are just rough numbers because you can't really put a gold value on it. But aside from that, the gold generation on this is actually pretty ridiculous from my experience. Like I like to start it on Nami, and it gives you a lot of harass in combination with your E, and yeah, the AP isn't really that great, but it's only 100 gold of it, so it's not too bad. The mana regen is nice, and the passive on it adds actually quite a lot of damage, especially in like burst opportunities. And the important thing is that in the level 1 and level 2 is so important in bot lane, and the extra 30 damage really gives you like that momentum in the very early stage of the game. Because like one Nami auto attack would do so much damage. And the other good thing about this is that usually people have less magic resist than they have armor, because supports will like stack armor through marks and seals and stuff like that, and even masteries, and sometimes even just ignore the MR because it's usually not that big of a deal in bot lane. It's mostly or primarily physical damage. So the good thing about this is that it does magic damage, so you can kind of cut through and do a little bit more damage, whereas if it was physical it wouldn't be as good, or if it was just straight attack damage like a Doran's Blade for example, wouldn't be as good. So I think Spellthief is actually like the second best starting item in the game, right below Doran Shield, assuming you are a champion that can actually take advantage of it. Obviously it's not going to work on champions like Thresh or Leona. I have tried it on Thresh and it wasn't wasn't very good. And then we kind of move back into Relic Shield, which is I would say the other second best starting item for those who it's applicable to. So your champions like Thresh, I mean not Thresh, well it could be used for Thresh, but primarily I'm thinking like Leona, Alistar, maybe any melee support really. It can be used on Thresh too because he has the execute from his E, but ideally you want to be using that on champions for a little bit extra harass and not on minions. Not to say you can't last hit without that, but it does help a little bit. But yeah, the most important thing about it is that it has most of its gold is put into health and health regen, which are probably the two best stats for supports in the bot lane. That's just pretty much how you win the lane, is sustain and raw health. So even though it's only worth 350 gold roughly, it is gold put in very good places. And also you have similar to the Spellthief's Edge, you'll have like 2 stacks of the thing that gives you 40 health, I believe it is, when you kill a minion, or 50 health, whatever it is, which is very good in the early game level 1 or 2 trade. So for example, you can trade with enemy at level 1 or 2, and then keep your charges, and then use those charges after you trade to heal up real quick. I think it gives 50 health to each person with the Relic Shield. It might be 40, but that's like ridiculous amount of health. That's almost like an extra health pot combined for both of you. Maybe a little bit more even. So definitely not something to be underestimated in what is usually a sustained war in the bot lane. So Relic Shield, I would say, is probably the second best start for those that can actually use it, alongside Spellthief's Edge. And then we get to Ruby Crystal, which is actually, in my opinion, a pretty good start because, once again, the best stat for bot lane is health, and Ruby Crystal gives all health, obviously, and it also has the shared effect or shared benefit with Doran's Ring, which is that you can start with 3 health pots instead of Doran's Shield, which will only give you 2. So the regen that you're missing from the Doran Shield, you kind of make up in that extra health potion. And the extra raw health from the Ruby Crystal gives you a lot of trading potential in the bot lane in combination with the extra health potion. I actually started it on Nami and it worked really well. I'm still debating whether or not Spellthief's... okay, so here's the... Well, let me just finish talking about Ruby Crystal real quick. The good thing about it is that Sightstone is cheaper now. It only costs 400 upgrade, 800 total. So you can pick up a Sightstone really early, and technically speaking, Sightstone is the best gold per 10 item, quote unquote, in the game. Because the earlier you get it, it's just going to keep paying for itself because you don't have to buy wards. And if you can get a Sightstone early, you pretty much become immune to ganks bottom, because it gets to be so difficult to gank if you can get like a ward at your wraith. Say you're a blue side and you get like a ward at your wraith, you get a ward on dragon, and you get a ward in the far lane brush. It's like impossible to gank you pretty much. So unless you're playing at something like Pantheon or like Rengar jungle, something gimmicky like that. Well, Pantheon isn't really gimmicky, but you know what I mean. So yeah, I actually really like Ruby Crystal start. I'm tempted to... I feel like it has potential to be... I put it at 3rd, but I think it's really, really close to Spellthief's Edge and Relic Shield. And let me just... Okay, so in a purely starting item comparison, I would say that Spellthief's and Relic Shield are better. But in an overall look, I would say Ruby Crystal is better. The reason why I say that is because Spellthief's Edge and Relic Shield don't really build into great items. You typically want Talisman on pretty much every support in the game. Like, Face of the Mountain can be good on Leona in certain builds, like I showed in my Leona guide video. But yeah, for other champions, it just... The two final products are just not that great. So while they will give you good laning phase and will generate you gold, the final product is just not worth it in my opinion. So usually what will end up happening is you sell your Targon's Brace or your Frostfang after somewhere in the mid game. You sell it and then buy Talisman, because Talisman has 20% CDR, it has the best active in the game, well, out of the 3. And yeah, you just need it in a lot of situations. So while Spellthief's Edge and Relic Shield are both good starting items, they aren't very good items in the scope of the entire game. So for that reason, I'm tempted to say that Doran Shield and Ruby Crystal are actually the 2 best starts in the game. And yeah, yeah, so I guess the list would be something like Doran Shield, Ruby Crystal, Spellthief's Edge, Relic Shield on the same level. Or let me rephrase that. First Doran Shield, second Ruby Crystal, third Spellthief's Edge and Relic Shield on the same level, and then after that you would have Doran's Ring and Doran's Blade on the same level. After that you would have and then after that you would have Ancient Coin last. Ancient Coin is just really mediocre. And I don't really consider Fairy Charm or Rejuvenation be like reasonable starts anymore. I think that those are definitely not even really to be considered at this point, mainly because invades are just not really worth it anymore with how much First Bloods got slashed. So it's just really not worth it to risk invades anymore. We may see an evolution where it becomes worth it if buffs start becoming extremely valuable, but as it stands now, it seems like in competitive play, when someone invades a steal buff, the other team just mirrors and steals the other team's buff as well. So it seems like stealing buffs isn't really that valuable anymore. Unless you can somehow do one of those things where like your top lane and mid will solo your blue buff while you steal the enemy blue buff, and then you get 2 buffs at the same time, and then you can go back and get your red, and then your opponent only has their red buff. But in general, it's just not worth it. So that's why Fairy Charm and stuff isn't a very good start anymore, or just like pure consumables, which I don't even think is even possible anymore because, well, it's probably possible, but definitely not viable. Anyway, I'm gonna move into this section. Well, let me see how long this video is. 21 minutes. Okay, that's pretty long, but I'm gonna move into a section of the video where I talk about what I think are the changes and what I think they should do to make all of these starts equal. So, what I think they should do is, well, let me just explain the issue currently, which is kind of the issue I explained with Spellthieves and Relic Shield earlier, is that Talisman is just too good. Several reasons why. First, it has 20% CDR, which is a ridiculous amount for an item that only costs 2,000 gold. It's just way too much in the scope of all other cooldown reduction items. Boots of Lucidity is actually pretty absurd also, which is why I was in support of it getting nerfed down to 10%, but people bitched about it and Riot reverted that change on the PBE. But in my opinion, Boots of Lucidity should be 10%, and Talisman should also be 10%. Items that are 20% CDR, in my opinion, you should be buying because they are 20% CDR. You shouldn't be buying them for other things that are on those items, or that should be like a big reason of why you're buying the item. So things like Zeke's Herald has 20% CDR, but no one really buys it because there are these other items in the game that also have 20% CDR or 15% CDR that are just a lot easier to hit CDR cap with. Locket is a very good example of an item that is balanced because it has 10% CDR. So you're buying it more so for the active than you are for the CDR. Imagine a world where Locket has 20% CDR. How ridiculously overpowered would that item be? That is pretty much exactly where Talisman is right now. It's just too good in comparison to the other items available. It needs to get nerfed down to 10% CDR, or the other items, Spellthief's Edge and Relic Shield, need to get buffed up to 20% CDR. I would rather see Talisman get nerfed down to 10% because I really don't like CDR as a stat. I don't like how it's so easy to hit the cap, and I don't like how readily available it is. The Spirit Visage nerf was a good start, and they need to, in my opinion, make some more advances, or however you want to say it, to get more items down to 10% CDR. Like, I think Athene's and Morellonomicon should both be 10% CDR, or maybe keep Morellonomicon at 20 and then maybe buff a few other stats on it to make it more useful. But honestly, I think they should both just go down to 10%, and keep items like Frozen Heart, Zeke's Herald. I think those are the only other two in the game that are 20% CDR, which is fine. Like, the reason why, a large reason of why those items aren't purchased is because CDR is too readily available. So there's just no reason to buy them anymore. Anyway, moving on. They need to nerf the CDR on Talisman down to 20%, down to 10%, and maybe buff the actives on Frost Queen's Claim and Face of the Mountain. I'm hesitant to say that though, because I think if you reduce the CDR on Talisman down to 10%, everything will be perfectly fine and be perfectly balanced. But as it stands now, on champions like Thresh and Nami especially, champions that really want CDR, even champions like Annie, who want CDR so they can get their stun off more through their passive by spamming spells more often. Those champions would buy Talisman even if the active on it sucked. Most likely, because 20% CDR is just insane. It's just too good. It allows you to hit these ridiculous caps on support champions that, yeah, like the best stats on supports right now are probably health and CDR. Any items that have a lot of health or CDR are going to be extremely good. That's why Doran Shield is so good. That's why items like Sightstone are good, in addition to the wards obviously, and why you often see supports just buy a straight up Giant's Belt because and just like keep it in their inventory. Like if you're playing against a mage like a LeBlanc for example, you shouldn't be buying Spectre's Cow and a health crystal. You should be buying a Giant's Belt and a Negatron Cloak. It's way more efficient in terms of defense, just because health is so good. But anyway, I'm kind of detracting from the point here. The point being, what I think they should do is just reduce Talisman's CDR down to 10%, and everything will be perfectly fine. Yeah, that's my opinion. Anyway, this video is probably hitting about 30 minutes now, so I'll just cut it off here. And I'll finish by saying, sorry I haven't been uploading many videos lately. I've been pretty busy with real life stuff and kind of just worn out on making videos in general. And I really wanted to make like an actual official video of this and make it a lot more organized, but it's not really, I don't know, I have trouble making videos on subjects that I don't find like exciting personally. So, and this isn't really like an exciting subject to me. So yeah, I apologize for that, but hopefully you guys have hopefully this answers your all's questions about starting items and whatnot. So yeah, until next time, I will see you guys for the next video, and yeah, bye.